Hi everyone, this is Global Travel Channel. Today I will tell about New Zealand. New Zealand, NZ, is an island country in the South Pacific Ocean located about 2,000 kilometers, 1,300 miles, southeast of Australia. The island nation consists of some smaller islands and two main islands, the North Island and the South Island, Tuaipaunamu, which are separated by the Cook Strait. New Zealand shares maritime borders with Australia, the island nations of Fiji and Tonga. New Zealand's islands are the surface area of the continent of Zealandia. Zealandia, now for the most part submerged, was formerly a large portion of the supercontinent of Gondwanaland. The geopolitical entity of the realm of New Zealand comprises New Zealand, the Cook Islands, Niue, an island, Tokelau, some coral atolls, and the Ross Dependency, a region in Antarctica. With an area of 270,467 square kilometers, the country is slightly larger than the United Kingdom, 242,900 square kilometers, or about the size of the US state of Colorado. New Zealand has a population of 5.1 million people, beginning 2021. The capital is Wellington, the country's largest city is Auckland. Spoken languages are English, 95%, and Maori, the language of the indigenous, Maori people of New Zealand. The history of New Zealand, Aotearoa, dates back to between 1320 and 1350s, when the main settlement period started, after it was discovered and settled by Polynesians, who developed a distinct Maori culture. Like other Pacific cultures, Maori society was centered on kinship links and connection with the land, but, unlike them, it was adapted to a cool, temperate environment rather than a warm, tropical one. The first European explorer known to visit New Zealand was Dutch navigator Abel Tasman on the 13th of December 1642. In 1643 he charted the west coast of the North Island. His expedition then sailed back to Batavia without setting foot on New Zealand soil. British explorer James Cook, who reached New Zealand in October 1769 on the first of his 3 voyages, was the first European to circumnavigate and map New Zealand. From the late 18th century, the country was regularly visited by explorers and other sailors, missionaries, traders and adventurers. In 1840 the Treaty of Waitangi was signed between representatives of the United Kingdom and various Maori chiefs, bringing New Zealand into the British Empire and giving Maori the same rights as British subjects. Disputes over the differing translations of the treaty and settled a desire to acquire land from Maori led to the New Zealand Wars from 1843. There was extensive British settlement throughout the rest of the 19th century and into the early part of the next century. The effects of European infectious diseases. The New Zealand Wars and the imposition of a European economic and legal system led to most of New Zealand's land passing from Maori to Pakeha, European ownership, and Maori became impoverished. The colony gained responsible government in the 1850s. From the 1890s the New Zealand Parliament enacted a number of progressive initiatives, including women's suffrage and old age pensions. After becoming a self-governing dominion with the British Empire in 1907, the country remained an enthusiastic member of the Empire, and over 100,000 New Zealanders fought in World War I as part of the New Zealand Expeditionary Force. After the war, New Zealand signed the Treaty of Versailles, 1919, joined the League of Nations, and pursued an independent foreign policy, while its defense was still controlled by Britain. When World War II broke out in 1939, New Zealand contributed to the defense of Britain and the Pacific War. The country contributed some 120,000 troops. From the 1930s the economy was highly regulated and an extensive welfare state was developed. From the 1950s Maori began moving to the cities in large numbers, and Maori culture underwent a renaissance. This led to the development of a Maori protest movement which in turn led to greater recognition of the Treaty of Waitangi in the late 20th century. The country's economy suffered in the aftermath of the 1973 global energy crisis, the loss of New Zealand's biggest export market upon Britain's entry to the European Economic Community, and rampant inflation. In 1984, the fourth Labour government was elected amid a constitutional and economic crisis. The interventionist policies of the Third National government were replaced by Rogernomics, a commitment to a free market economy. Foreign policy after 1984 became more independent, especially in pushing for a nuclear-free zone. Subsequent governments have generally maintained these policies, although tempering the free market ethos somewhat. In the 21st century, international tourism was a major contributor to the New Zealand economy, until it was brought almost to a halt by the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, and the service sector more generally has grown. Meanwhile, the traditional agricultural exports of meat, dairy and wool have been supplemented by other products such as fruit, wine and timber as the economy has diversified. The fifth Labour government led by Helen Clark was formed following the December 1999 election. 184, in power for 9 years, it maintained most of the previous government's economic reforms, restricting government intervention in the economy much more so than previous governments, while putting more emphasis on social policy and outcomes. For example, employment law was modified to give more protection to workers, 185, and the student loan system was changed to eliminate interest payments for New Zealand residents, students and graduates. 186. New Zealand retains strong but informal links to Britain, with many young New Zealanders travelling to Britain for their overseas experience. 187. Due to favourable working visa arrangements with Britain. Despite New Zealand's immigration liberalisation in the 1980s, Britons are still the largest group of migrants to New Zealand, due in part to recent immigration law changes that privilege fluent speakers of English. One constitutional link to Britain remains. New Zealand's head of state, the Queen and Right of New Zealand, is a British resident. However, British imperial honours were discontinued in 1996. The Governor-General has taken a more active role in representing New Zealand overseas, and appeals from the Court of Appeal to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council were replaced by a local Supreme Court of New Zealand in 2003. There is public debate about whether New Zealand should become a republic, with public sentiment divided on the issue. 188. Foreign policy has been essentially independent since the mid-1980s. Under Prime Minister Clark, foreign policy reflected the priorities of liberal internationalism. She stressed the promotion of democracy and human rights, the strengthening of the role of the United Nations, the advancement of anti-militarism and disarmament, and the encouragement of free trade. 189. She sent troops to the war in Afghanistan, but did not contribute combat troops to the Iraq War, although some medical and engineering units were sent. 190. John Key led the National Party to victory in the November 2008. 191. Key became Prime Minister of the Fifth National Government, which entered government at the beginning of the late 2000s recession. In February 2011, a major earthquake in Christchurch, the nation's third largest urban area, significantly impacted the national economy, and the government formed the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority in response. 192. In foreign policy, Key announced the withdrawal of New Zealand Defence Force personnel from their deployment in the war in Afghanistan, and signed the Wellington Declaration with the United States. A Labour-led coalition government led by Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern was formed in October 2017. Among other issues, it hoped to tackle the burgeoning housing shortage crisis in New Zealand. 194. On the 15th of March 2019, alone, terrorist shooter attacked 2 mosques during Friday prayer, killing 51 people and injuring 40 more. 195. 196, and live-streamed the attack. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who referred to the attack as one of New Zealand's darkest days. 197, led efforts to support the Muslim community. 198, and banned semi-automatic rifles. The COVID-19 pandemic, which reached New Zealand in early 2020, has seriously affected the country. In March 2020, borders and entry ports of New Zealand were closed to all non-residents. 201, a national lockdown was imposed by the government, beginning on the 25th of March 2020. 202, with all restrictions, except border controls, lifted on the 9th of June. 203, the government's elimination approach has been praised internationally. 204. 205, the government has a planned response to the projected severe economic impact from the pandemic. 206. 207, the 2020 general election resulted in a victory for the Labour Party, the first outright majority for a single party since the introduction of MMP. 208, during the 2020 election there were 2 referendums, to legalise recreational cannabis and to legalise voluntary euthanasia. The cannabis referendum was rejected and the euthanasia referendum was supported. New Zealand NZ is an island country in the South Pacific Ocean located about 2,000 kilometers, 1,300 miles, southeast of Australia. The island nation consists of some smaller islands and two main islands, the North Island, Tai Kai Maui, and the South Island, Tuaipaunamu, which are separated by the Cook Strait. New Zealand shares maritime borders with Australia, the island nations of Fiji and Tonga. New Zealand's islands are the surface area of the continent of Zealandia. Zealandia, now for the most part submerged, was formerly a large portion of the supercontinent of Gondwanaland. This is all about of New Zealand. For more interesting and historic videos, like, share, and subscribe the channel and press the bell icon.